Now, it is my pleasure to bring back Mr. Cruz, Rafael Cruz, who's going to share some final thoughts with us. And then we got one more thing in store for you. But Mr. Cruz, we are dying to hear the real story of what it was like to raise a United States Senator. Tell us. Thank you. No.
All right. All right. Well, I'm sorry for the short introduction before, but my son had to catch a plane, so I was trying to give him the opportunity to get out of here and get back home to see his wife and his kids. But you know, as I said before, he was introduced to Republican politics when he was 8 years old. As he mentioned before, I grew up in Cuba under a cruel, oppressive military dictatorship. And by the grace of God, I was able to leave Cuba in 1957. And after seeing Marxism in Cuba, and then in 1976, I was shocked when I saw socialism being promoted by the new government of Jimmy Carter. And as a result of that, I became very involved in Republican politics. 1979, I joined an organization called the Religious Roundtable. The Religious Roundtable was a Judeo-Christian organization which, together with Moral Majority, we mobilized millions of Americans to put Ronald Reagan in office. So when my son Ted was 8 years old, 1979, our conversation around the dinner table was all about politics and about looking at the stark difference between the socialist policies of Jimmy Carter and a strong constitutional conservative like Ronald Reagan. So for 2 years, all my son heard around the dinner table was what stark difference and the fact that we needed a constitutional conservative in this country. I remember during that time, I don't remember how many times I said, you know, Ted, when I lost my freedom in Cuba, I had a place to come to. If we lose our freedoms here, where are we going to go? And you know, there is no place to go. We need to really think about that. I don't know about you. I lost my freedom once. I am not willing to lose it again. I will die fighting for my freedom. And you know, so often I come across people that say to me, oh, we could never lose our freedom in America. But the reality is we are losing our freedom in America. You know, I feel so uncomfortable standing behind the podium. I don't like to have this divider, but I can't take this. Oh, maybe I can't take this one. Maybe I can stand out here and not be behind this thing. But you know, the Bible says that our steps are ordered of the Lord. I remember as my son Ted was entering high school, through a client of mine, I was able to introduce Ted to a man by the name of Roland Story. And Roland Story was a very pivotal individual in the life of my son. Roland Story was the president of an organization called the Free Enterprise Institute. So now my son is just entering high school. He's reading Milton Friedman. He's reading Adam Smith. He's reading Bastiat. He's reading Hayek. He's reading von Mises. And if you don't know who those people are, you need some homework to do. He was also reading the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. And as they were starting as freshmen in high school, the Free Enterprise Institute started a group of 5 kids, called them the Constitutional Corroborators. And these 5 kids memorized the entire US Constitution, each of them. They used what was called a mnemonic device where they would memorize a series of letters, just a string of letters, and from that they would recreate the text. For the next 4 years, those 5 kids went around the state of Texas speaking at Rotary clubs. They will come to a Rotary Club at lunchtime, and they would put 5 easels at the front of the room. While people were having lunch, these 5 kids would write the entire US Constitution by memory on those easels. And then they would give a half-hour speech on free market economics on the Constitution. During the 4 years of high school, those 4 kids gave approximately 80 speeches on free market economics and the Constitution. Before my son left high school, he became passionate about the Constitution. He became passionate about the Declaration. He became passionate about free markets and limited government and the rule of law. And that passion became like fire in his bones. And the reason I know that my son Ted will not compromise those principles is that that fire is as alive today as it was over 30 years ago. And you know, as I had this great privilege after leaving Cuba to come to the greatest country on the face of the earth and to come to the greatest state within the greatest country on the face of the earth, I am so proud to be an American. I became an ardent student of American history. And as I look at the rich heritage that we enjoy in this country, I read about the Pilgrims that my son alluded to a minute ago. And you know, when they started in this country, they decided to try a communist experiment. You know, Governor Bradford looked at all this land and said to them, look, we got all this land, let us all work the land together. And we'll share on the produce of the land. That was a total failure. They almost starved to death. But you know, Governor Bradford was smart enough and flexible enough that when he realized that didn't work, he said, all right, let each one of us take our own plot of land. You work your land, you feed your family. And the free enterprise system was born in America. You know, now, if nearly 400 years ago, a socialist experiment in America was a total failure, why would we try the same thing over again? It doesn't make any sense, does it? George Santayana once said, if we do not learn the lessons of history, we're bound to repeat it. Well, anyways, as I looked at our history, and I'd look at these men that forged our revolution and forged our founding documents, but even before the founding documents, you know, I speak to pastors all over this country. Last year, I did 12 pastors' conferences all over this country because I realized that pastors are hiding behind their pulpits and not addressing the problems of America. And when I realized that only 25% of Christians are voting, only 50% of Christians are registered to vote. And of that 50%, only 50% are voting. The pastors are a great part of the problem. But that's not the way it used to be. As a matter of fact, it was pastors that were at the forefront of the revolution. Men like George Whitefield and many others. As a matter of fact, during the War of Independence, it was pastors that were at the forefront. No one was more feared by the British government than those they called the Black Robe Regiment. These men, these pastors, were called the Black Robe Regiment because many of them wore long black robes. Many of them had the Continental Army uniform underneath their black robes. They would preach on Sunday, take off their black robe, and go fight for our independence. You know, earlier today I asked a small group of people, do you know where Paul Revere was going when he was shouting, "The British are coming"? He was going to the home of a pastor by the name of Jonas Clark. At the home of Jonas Clark, there were two other men, John Hancock and Samuel Adams. Pastor Jonas Clark was one of those Black Robe Regiment pastors. The very first battle for our independence was the Battle of Lexington. You know who led the Battle of Lexington? Pastor Jonas Clark. That's our heritage. And my question is, where are those pastors today? Unfortunately, they're hiding behind their pulpit. But you know, if we're to resolve the problems of America, we have to stop being so passive. We have to stop being so complacent. You see, we have a malaise in this country. We have been drinking the Kool-Aid for so long that we think, oh, this could never happen in America. But it is happening in America. And we are so passive. It's like a frog. You throw a frog in a pot of hot water, and that frog would jump right out. Put that frog in a pot of cold water and put it on the stove. And that water warms up a little bit at a time. And that frog is comfortable. That frog is complacent. And you can boil that frog to death. And we are being boiled to death just like frogs because of complacency. We got to realize that we don't have much time. As a matter of fact, I submit to you, we don't have till 2016. If we do not retake the Senate in 2014, we may not have a country by 2016. It is that critical. You know, at least half the justices in the Supreme Court are over 80 years old. There's a very precarious balance in the Supreme Court. It would be bad enough to replace an 80-year-old liberal with a 40-year-old liberal. But it would be disastrous to replace an 80-year-old conservative with a 40-year-old liberal. It would take 30 years to recover from that. And with the judicial activism that we have in this country, it will destroy America. But that complacency is not the only challenge we're facing. The second, and perhaps a bigger challenge, is political correctness. We are so concerned about offending anyone that we have prostituted our principles on behalf of being liked by everyone. You know, Jesus wasn't liked by everyone. As a matter of fact, Jesus said, they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. If you are not being attacked by anyone, Congressman, you know this very well. If you're not being attacked by everyone, I question your walk. You're not making an impact upon our society. And you know something, as a Christian, my highest goal in life is that one day I'm going to have to stand before my Maker. And the words I want to hear from my Lord is, "Well done, good and faithful servant." How different would it be if that was our main concern, not trying to please everyone? You know, unfortunately, we have too many politicians that's what they're doing. They go to Washington. I remember when my son was elected, before he actually was sworn in, he was being interviewed by Chris Wallace and Fox News Sunday. And Chris Wallace said, Senator Cruz, are you coming to Washington to join the club? And my son said, no, Chris, I'm coming to Washington to kick down the doors of the club, to tear down the curtains and auction the silverware. But the problem we have in Washington, as well as in Austin, is that too many people go to just join the club. You see, we have forgotten what those framers did. Those framers did something so revolutionary. Before them, every government around the world was a top-down government. Every country was ruled by either a monarch or a tyrant, and people were simply serfs of the government. That government exercised total, absolute control upon them. And the framers had the revolutionary idea to turn that system right side up. And it became a bottom-up system where we, the people, are the ones who rule. We, the people. You see, the biggest thing that many politicians don't get is that they work for us, we don't work for them. They need to realize that they go to Washington or they go to Austin to serve with the people, not to be members of an elite class that basically the rules and the laws that they pass, don't apply to them. And because of that, they are so detached from what's happening in the country. We see it especially with those that have been there for 20 or 30 years. And there's a total disconnect with we the people. You know, that's not what the framers had in mind. That's not at all what the framers had in mind. We have gotten so far away from what the framers intended for this constitutional republic. You know, I was sharing this afternoon something that I want to share again with you because it's something that most people are not aware. You know, one of the biggest misconceptions in this country is what is called separation of church and state. And that's the reason why many pastors are hiding behind the pulpit, because they have been told the lie that they cannot engage in the political arena. As a matter of fact, if you realize that in the time of Christ, feeding the poor was the responsibility of the church. Taking care of the widows and the orphans was the responsibility of the church. That's welfare. That's unemployment. Not the responsibility of government, the responsibility of the church, but the church abdicated its responsibilities. And you know, I always get a big eyebrow when I tell people, did you know that the Bible tells you who to vote for? The Bible tells you exactly how to vet a candidate. When Moses crossed the Red Sea with about 1 million people, now he's trying to govern about 1 million people, and he's going crazy. And here comes his father-in-law, Jethro. And he says, Moses, what you're doing is not good. And then he says in Exodus 18:21, he says, you select from among the people. In other words, you elect. And he gives 4 qualifications. He says, you select from among the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. 4 qualifications. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. What does able men mean? Men and women that can do the job, that are capable of doing the job. That's the first qualification. Make sure the candidate is capable of doing the job. Number two, such as fear God. Let's translate that into something that we can all understand. If you fear God, you obey God's principles. What we could call a Judeo-Christian ethic. What is a Judeo-Christian ethic? Well, it is honesty, it is integrity, it is hard work, it is individual responsibility, and yes, it's free enterprise and limited government. That's a Judeo-Christian ethic. Not social justice. Social justice is totally contrary to a Judeo-Christian ethic. It sounds very good. You know, the libs are masters at their terminology. Social justice. It sounds so good because who would want social injustice? But let me tell you what social justice really means. It means collectivism. It means mob rule. It means the rights of the group, and it is the contrary of individual responsibility. It destroys individual responsibility, which is a fundamental basis of a Judeo-Christian system. It's fundamental to free enterprise. So, able men, such as fear God. Number three, men of truth. Boy, do we need truth in government today. It seems like all we hear is lies upon more lies from this administration. Our president is a master at it. You know, my son mentioned the interview he was having with Eric Holder. And, I mean, did you see that stonewalling of Eric Holder every time he was being asked? Well, I can't talk about that. We have an ongoing investigation. I think the term, Congressman, is the Potomac Shuffle. You know, the masters at the Potomac Shuffle. But, you know, we have to hold these people accountable. So, able men, such as fear God, men of truth. The fourth qualification, hating covetousness. Now, covetousness in government is not so much about money as it is about power and control. Boy, they covet that power. It's all about control. That's what Obamacare is all about. It's about controlling our lives, controlling 1/5 of the economy and controlling every bit of your life. Now, some of the purists may say, oh, that's in the Old Testament. You go to the New Testament. In Acts chapter 6, verse 3, they're getting ready to elect the first deacons. Now they say, okay, you select again from among the people, number one, men, and of course women, of good reputation. What is that? That's men of truth. That's the same thing. Number two, full of the Holy Spirit. That's the same as such as fear God. Number three, full of wisdom. That means able men. Same qualifications. So we need to start looking at how to vet candidates and look at them not on a partisan label, but look at them on a matter of principle. Now, it is very good that today our principles are very clearly defined by our Republican platform. A Republican that is strongly pro-life, pro-family, pro-free enterprise, pro-rule of law. I'll tell you, am I out of time? Well, I just want to tell you, we need to get our marching orders. We have an unprecedented opportunity in 2014 to turn this country around. The greatest blessing we have received from the Obama administration is Obamacare. And I'll tell you why, because Obamacare is such a disaster that is waking up millions of Americans to get involved. People that have never been involved in politics are getting involved today. I remember places where I went to speak a year ago that there were 50 people, now there are 300 people. And that's happening all over America. Obamacare is waking up millions of Americans. And you put on top of that the NSA scandal, the IRS scandal, Benghazi, and we have an army of grassroots people saying, I am fed up and I am not going to take it anymore. I encourage you, let's shoulder to shoulder work together to restore freedom in America, to restore the Constitution, to restore limited government, free enterprise, and the rule of law. Thank you. God bless you. God bless America. God bless Texas.